Billionaire saw Black Waitress feeding his autistic son. What she did next changed his life forever. What if a single moment of kindness could transform 2 lives forever? 42-year-old James Mitchell had built an empire worth billions, but sitting in that quiet corner booth of Rosewood Diner, watching his 8-year-old son Noah rock back and forth while covering his ears, James felt like the poorest man alive. The restaurant's usual dinner rush created a symphony of chaos, clinking plates, overlapping conversations, the hiss of the grill, and Noah was drowning in it all. James's hands trembled as he reached across the table, unsure how to comfort his son, who seemed trapped in a world he couldn't escape. 3 years after the autism diagnosis, James still felt helpless watching Noah struggle with environments that overwhelmed his sensitive nervous system. But what happened next in that small-town diner would prove that sometimes angels wear aprons instead of wings, and that the greatest wealth isn't measured in dollars, but in moments of pure human connection. Where are you watching from tonight? The Rosewood Diner had been James's sanctuary for the past 6 months, ever since he'd moved Noah to this quiet Colorado mountain town, desperate to escape the relentless pace of their former life in Manhattan. After Noah's mother had walked away 2 years earlier, unable to handle their son's needs, James had thrown himself into work, hiring the best nannies money could buy. But nothing seemed to help Noah find peace. The specialists, the private schools, the expensive therapies, they'd all failed to reach his son in any meaningful way. Tonight had started like so many others. Noah had spent the afternoon at his new school, and James could tell from the moment he picked him up that it had been difficult. His son's usually bright eyes looked tired, and the subtle self-soothing behaviors had intensified. James had hoped a quiet dinner at their usual spot might help Noah decompress, but the diner was busier than usual, filled with families celebrating a local high school's homecoming victory. Noah's breathing became shallow and rapid as a group of teenagers burst through the front door, their excited chatter adding to the noise. James watched helplessly as his son began the familiar pattern of distress. First the gentle rocking, then the hands covering his ears, followed by the soft humming that meant Noah was trying to create his own calm space in the chaos. Other diners began to notice, some shooting curious glances their way, others whispering among themselves. James felt the familiar weight of judgment settling on his shoulders. He'd grown accustomed to the stares, the unsolicited advice, the well-meaning but misguided suggestions from strangers who thought they understood autism because they'd watched a movie or read an article. His jaw tightened as he noticed a middle-aged woman at the next table nudging her husband and pointing in their direction. "It's okay, buddy," James whispered to Noah, though he knew his words couldn't penetrate the wall of sensory overload his son was experiencing. "We can leave if you need to." But Noah didn't respond. His humming grew slightly louder, and his rocking became more pronounced. James reached for his wallet, ready to pay and escape before the situation escalated, when he noticed her for the first time. A waitress in her mid-30s with kind eyes and gentle movements, carrying a tray of food toward a table near the kitchen. She moved with a quiet confidence that somehow didn't disturb the delicate balance of the room. Camille Washington had been working at Rosewood Diner for 8 years, ever since she'd moved to Colorado to care for her aging grandmother. She'd raised 3 younger siblings after their parents died in a car accident, and she recognized the signs of a parent struggling to help a child in distress. But more importantly, she saw something in Noah's movements that others missed. Not a disruption, but a little boy doing his best to cope with a world that felt too loud, too bright, too much. As she watched James's face crumple with the familiar mixture of love and helplessness that she knew so well, Camille made a decision that would change everything. She set down her tray and walked slowly toward their table, her movements deliberate and calm. Camille approached their table with a kind of gentle presence that seemed to calm the very air around her. She'd learned this skill over years of caring for her youngest brother, Michael, who had similar sensitivities, though his challenges had never been formally diagnosed due to their family's inability to afford proper medical care. She understood the language of overwhelmed nervous systems, the way certain sounds could feel like physical pain, and how the wrong kind of attention could make everything worse. "Excuse me," she said softly, crouching down to James's eye level rather than towering over the table. "I couldn't help but notice your son might be feeling a bit overwhelmed. Would it be okay if I tried something that sometimes helps?" James looked up, surprised by her gentle approach. Most people either ignored them completely or offered unsolicited advice with a tone that suggested they weren't handling things properly. But something in Camille's eyes told him she understood in a way that others didn't. Yes please, James said, his voice thick with exhaustion and hope. Nothing I do seems to help. Camille nodded and slowly reached into her apron pocket, pulling out a small, smooth stone that she'd carried for years, a gift from her grandmother that had once helped calm her own anxious moments. Without saying a word, she placed it gently on the table near Noah's hand, not forcing interaction but simply offering comfort. Then she did something unexpected. She began humming quietly, matching the rhythm and tone of Noah's own humming, creating a soft harmony instead of trying to stop his self-soothing behavior. The effect was almost immediate. Noah's rocking slowed slightly, and his tight grip on his ears loosened just enough for him to peek through his fingers. Other diners watched in fascination as this waitress, who many of them had seen serve coffee and comfort food for years, revealed a depth of understanding they'd never witnessed. But their attention only added to James's anxiety about the situation becoming a spectacle. "People are staring," James whispered, his corporate executive instincts still programmed to view any public attention as potentially damaging. "Let them," Camille said quietly, never breaking her gentle humming. "Your son is doing exactly what he needs to do. He's not broken, Mr. Mitchell. He's just experiencing the world differently." The fact that she knew his name shouldn't have surprised him. In a town this small, everyone knew about the billionaire who'd moved to Colorado with his son, but hearing her speak with such certainty about Noah's worth made something inside James's chest loosen. Slowly, Noah's hand reached toward the smooth stone, his fingers exploring its surface while his humming began to synchronize more fully with Camille's. The harmony they created seemed to form a small bubble of peace around their table, and gradually, other conversations in the diner resumed their normal flow. James watched in amazement as his son's breathing steadied and the tension in his small shoulders began to melt away. "If this moment touched your heart, please give the video a thumbs up." But then the front door burst open again, and a group of teenagers stumbled in, loud and boisterous from their celebration, and Noah's fragile calm shattered like glass. The teenagers' arrival hit Noah like a physical blow. Their excited shouts about the football game victory, combined with the sharp screech of chair legs against the floor as they commandeered a large table, sent Noah spiraling into a meltdown that was more intense than anything James had witnessed in months. The gentle humming stopped abruptly, replaced by a high-pitched keening sound that came from somewhere deep in Noah's chest. James felt his world collapsing as his son began hitting his own head with his fists, a behavior that always terrified him. "Noah, no buddy please," James pleaded, reaching for his son's hands, but his touch only seemed to increase Noah's distress. The restaurant fell into uncomfortable silence as every patron turned to stare at the billionaire's son having what they saw as a public tantrum. Camille's heart broke watching this little boy drowning in sensory overload while his father struggled helplessly. She'd seen this exact scenario play out with her brother Michael countless times, and she knew that well-meaning interference often made things worse. But she also knew that Noah needed an anchor, something to help him find his way back to calm. Without hesitation, Camille slipped off her shoes and sat cross-legged on the diner floor beside Noah's chair, making herself small and non-threatening. She began speaking in barely audible tones, not to Noah directly, but as if talking to herself about simple, concrete things. The smooth texture of the stone, the warm yellow light from the overhead fixture, the smell of fresh bread from the kitchen. "The stone feels cool and round," she whispered. "It's been worn smooth by water over many years. The light above us is gentle, like morning sunshine. The bread in the oven smells like Saturday mornings when my grandmother used to bake." James watched in stunned silence as Noah's frantic movements began to slow. His son was listening to Camille's quiet descriptions, using her voice as a lifeline back to the present moment. She wasn't trying to stop his meltdown or rush his recovery. She was simply offering him a different focus for his overwhelmed senses. "I used to have a brother who got scared by loud sounds too," Camille continued in her soft voice. "He taught me that sometimes the world feels too big and too loud, and that's okay. It doesn't mean there's anything wrong with feeling things deeply." For the first time since Noah's diagnosis, James heard someone speak about his son's autism not as a deficit or a problem to be fixed, but as a different way of experiencing life that deserved respect and understanding. Tears he'd been holding back for months began to fall freely. The teenagers, meanwhile, had grown uncomfortable with the scene they'd inadvertently caused. Their celebration felt suddenly inappropriate, and they began gathering their things to leave, offering mumbled apologies as they headed for the door. As the restaurant returned to its previous calm, Noah's keening faded to soft whimpers and eventually, to silence. He was exhausted but no longer panicked, his small body leaning slightly toward Camille's presence without making contact. Have you ever faced something like this? Let us know in the comments. James realized he was witnessing something he'd never seen before, someone truly understanding his son's needs without judgment or pity. In the gentle quiet that followed, Noah slowly reached out and picked up the smooth stone from the table, turning it over in his hands with the careful attention he usually reserved for his favorite toys. For the first time in months, James saw something that looked like peace on his son's face. How did you know what to do? James asked Camille, his voice hoarse with emotion. Camille smiled softly, still sitting on the floor beside Noah's chair. My little brother Michael had moments like this. We never had money for doctors or fancy therapies, but my grandmother taught me that sometimes the best medicine is just understanding that a person's heart is good, even when their outside doesn't look like everyone else's. She looked at Noah, who was now completely absorbed in the texture of the stone, his breathing steady and calm. Your son isn't having a tantrum, Mr. Mitchell. He's having a human moment in a world that sometimes feels too intense for his sensitive spirit. There's a big difference. James felt something fundamental shift inside his chest. For 3 years, he'd been taking Noah to specialists who spoke about behavioral interventions and managing symptoms. They'd used clinical language that made his son sound like a problem to be solved rather than a person to be understood. But this waitress, with her worn apron and gentle wisdom, had seen Noah's essential goodness from the very beginning. I don't know how to thank you, James said, meaning every word. You don't need to thank me, Camille replied, slowly standing up and putting her shoes back on. Just remember what you saw here tonight. Your son is perfect exactly as he is. He just experiences love and fear and joy more intensely than most of us do. As if summoned by her words, Noah looked up from the stone and made direct eye contact with Camille for the first time. His voice, when it came, was soft but clear. The stone feels like my grandmother's hands. James's breath caught in his throat. Noah rarely spoke about his grandmother, James's mother, who had passed away just before Noah's diagnosis. But when he did, it was always with a reverence that suggested deep, unspoken memories of love and safety. That's the most beautiful thing anyone's ever said about that stone, Camille told Noah with complete sincerity. My grandmother gave it to me when I was feeling scared, just like you were tonight. Maybe it remembers all the love it's been given. Noah nodded solemnly, as if this explanation made perfect sense to him. Can I keep it? He asked, his words directed at Camille but his eyes seeking his father's permission. Of course you can, Camille said. But only if you promise to remember that you're braver than you know, and that being different is what makes you special. James felt years of worry and isolation beginning to crack open, making room for something he'd almost forgotten how to feel: hope. If you've been enjoying this story, subscribe to our channel for more heartwarming tales. But as Camille prepared to return to her other tables, James realized this couldn't be the end of their story. Wait, James called out as Camille picked up her order pad. Please, I need to ask you something. He paused, looking at Noah, who was peacefully examining his new treasure, then back at this remarkable woman who had given them both such an unexpected gift. Would you consider letting me help your family the way you've helped mine tonight? Camille's eyes widened in surprise. Mr. Mitchell, I appreciate the thought, but I didn't do this expecting anything in return. I know you didn't, James said, his voice steady with newfound purpose. That's exactly why I want to help. You said you had a brother who experiences the world as Noah does, but couldn't afford proper support. What if we could change that? Over the following months, James learned about Camille's family, how she'd sacrificed her own college dreams to raise her siblings, how her brother Michael had struggled in school without a proper understanding of his needs, how her grandmother's medical bills had drained their savings. But more importantly, he discovered something he'd never expected, a friendship that transcended their different backgrounds and circumstances. James established a foundation focused on supporting families affected by autism, with Camille as his partner in creating programs that emphasized understanding over intervention. Together, they developed support groups where parents could share their experiences without judgment, sensory-friendly community spaces, and training programs for teachers and caregivers. Noah flourished in ways James had never imagined possible. With Camille's gentle guidance, he learned that his intense way of experiencing the world wasn't something to hide or overcome, but a gift that allowed him to notice beauty and details that others missed. He began attending a small school that celebrated neurodiversity, where his unique perspective was valued rather than merely tolerated. The smooth stone became Noah's constant companion, a tangible reminder of the night when a stranger's kindness had changed everything. He learned to use it during overwhelming moments, but more importantly, he learned to trust his own ability to navigate a world that was sometimes too much. 6 months after that pivotal evening at Rosewood Diner, James sat in the same booth watching Noah carefully arrange crayons by color while drawing a picture of his new school. Camille approached with 2 cups of coffee and Noah's usual hot chocolate, moving with the same gentle presence that had first caught James's attention. "You know," James said, accepting his coffee with gratitude, "I came to this town thinking I needed to fix my son, but it turned out we just needed to find people who could see him clearly." Camille smiled, settling into the booth across from them. Sometimes the best way to help someone is simply to believe in who they already are. Noah looked up from his drawing, the smooth stone resting beside his elbow. "Camille," he said with the directness that characterized all his communication, "thank you for teaching my dad that I'm not broken." As James watched his son return to his artwork with contentment and focus, he realized that the greatest wealth he'd ever accumulated wasn't measured in dollars, but in moments like these, quiet dinners shared with people who understood that love comes in many forms. If you enjoyed this story, please remember to like, leave a comment with your thoughts, and subscribe for more heartwarming tales. Thank you for joining us on this journey of discovering that sometimes the most profound changes come from the simplest acts of human kindness.